Hey everybody, and welcome to Bastock and Bachelor's Bullshit Busters Live. We are live from the Glasgow HQ, all the way up in the north. The Glasgow sofa, indeed. So we thought, I'm up visiting Adam up here in Glasgow this week, so we thought we would do a special edition of the Bullshit Busters in the same room for once, rather than over Zoom conference like we normally do.
You've got a different background now, rather than my usual kind of backdrop of the office.
Yes.
So quite a nice change.
Exactly. So this week we are going to be talking about Yoast SEO, which is an SEO plugin for WordPress. There's a couple of things that we hear a lot when we talk to small business owners about what they think it does versus what it's actually doing. And there's also just a couple of tips that we've got around making it work, and also helping to understand a few of the myths that I think people have around its sort of magic wand. Some of Yoast SEO's marketing is fairly optimistic, I would say, about what it can achieve. So we thought we'd give you a rundown today on what Yoast SEO can realistically achieve. So Adam, do you want to start us off with a bit of a sort of introduction to what Yoast SEO is and what it's actually sort of predominantly doing?
Yeah, so it's a plugin that will then allow you on all your pages, that will kind of have a box beneath the content that you can scroll down to, and gives a little preview of what your site would look like in a Google search result. So it is your homepage, it will kind of give you the title, and then it will give you the meta description and the slug, which is just the URL. What you can do with that, and the main thing that you should be using it for, is going in there and just editing that page title and the meta description to be as relevant as possible. So if you have a page that's called services, ideally you change that to not just be services, but in that kind of box you can then change the page title to say photography in Brighton or something like that, and it allows you a level of customization over how your pages appear in search on an individual level. There seems to be a lot of other features that it has as well. So that's the kind of the main one, the bread and butter of it, essentially. It also generates your sitemaps. It allows you to kind of change the brand name that appears on the meta description of all your pages. It has a kind of traffic light system, which I'm going to come back to later, in terms of grading a page on its SEO-ness, on how well it thinks, based on red, orange, and green. Can't remember colours. Excellent. And then there's probably other bits to it, but do you know more about the site?
Well, I think also the main thing to point out is that, bizarrely, WordPress doesn't do all of that stuff that Adam has just mentioned out of the box.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make you a sitemap that is of any use, which Google requires. And it's odd that WordPress, even in the latest 0.5 update, didn't do this. And I think it speaks volumes to the fact that Yoast is so popular and so almost sort of baked into WordPress that even WordPress didn't feel it necessary to make their own version of it, because Yoast just does it.
Just mad.
So the free version of Yoast will solve most of your SEO problems. And when we say problems, like things that WordPress doesn't do out of the box, so the meta description, the title, the slug, what it looks like in search results, and the sitemap, all of that you don't get with WordPress, but with the free version of Yoast SEO you do. So it's a great way of getting that.
Just very quickly on that as well, there's the big feature that I've forgotten about to mention earlier, with the robots.txt control, where you can kind of select it or deselect certain categories for it to crawl. So on a basic WordPress site, you basically want it to crawl everything, but if you're on slightly more complex sites, you might want to just disable the tag or certain categories or stuff like that from being crawled by Google in the robots.txt and then kind of the indexing. So, and that's quite a big feature that can go wrong for clients. There's some that I've seen where that box has been deselected and just not ticked, and that's meant that those pages aren't being kind of crawled and discovered by Google. So
they do have a lot of really good blogs though. So for example, if you're running a e-commerce site, you can just Google for best Yoast settings for e-commerce, and the official Yoast blog is really good at telling you how that should be set. If you're then running, let's say, just a personal blog, it's got the best settings for that. If you've got a certain theme that you're using, quite often Yoast has specific settings that work with it. So if in doubt and you're a bit worried about your settings being wrong, just Google or search within the Yoast Help Center. They've got hundreds and hundreds of guides for every theme, all the big themes you can think of. There's optimal settings for it. So you mentioned earlier about the traffic light system for Yoast. Do you want to give us a bit more of a rundown about what that's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to correct me here because it can be a bit confusing. But essentially, the traffic light system is where you will put in, say, the search term that you want that page to be optimized for. So the example earlier, or the example I always use, is like red paint, for example. So if you've got a page that's about red paint and then you put in the term red paint into the Yoast kind of search box, not search box, what's it called? Like search phrase, optimization box. I can't remember what it's exactly called.
Optimization key phrase.
That's the one. Then it will kind of grade the page based on many factors. So it will check like the H1, the meta title, the meta description, how many times it's mentioned in the text, and various kind of other factors around kind of how it's used in that, and then will give you a grading for the page. So the idea behind that is that if you've got quite a small site, you might go through every page on your site, enter the key phrase in that page is trying to rank for. So you might have like red paint, blue paint, yellow paint, pink paint, outdoor paint. It was all different pages, and then all of those would be green in terms of their optimization, and that they are as optimized for those terms as they can be. That's the kind of the perfect scenario for it. It's one of the biggest kind of concerns that I get from WordPress site owners is that all of their traffic lights are red, or they're not they're not green, so they're either kind of blank or they're red, etc. That doesn't mean that the site is bad for SEO, because on that page for red paint, I might have put in the phrase blue paint, and then it's suddenly going to switch it to red. Therefore, it is a very binary system, and you kind of have to know how to use it to make the most of it, and you can kind of quite easily trick the system into either giving false positives or kind of just being quite a negative system. And kind of my concern and caution with it is sometimes that store owners can get too hung up on that traffic light system and just ignore the actual page itself and go, is this page delivering information and kind of content to users? If yes, you will probably be okay to a certain level. I think that the concern is where you get hung up on that traffic light system and go, well, it's red, but this page I think is actually quite good, and then you start pulling that page apart, trying to please the Yoast traffic light system.
Yeah.
And I would always advise against that.
Yeah.
Having said that, Simon's kind of been talking to me about the paid model of Yoast and the paid subscription, which seems to be a bit more clever, or a bit more nuanced in how it kind of reads those phrases.
So it uses, with the paid version of Yoast, you get synonyms. So you get the alternative meaning of those words. It will take into account, and it doesn't downgrade you, i.e. so you won't lose your green ranking because you're using a synonym of that word. You can also put in alternative phrases. So let's say you've got building a shelf, you may also have flat pack shelving as an alternative key phrase. So you can see how the page works for both of those key phrases. The other thing it will also do is it will suggest internal linking. So let's say you had a page on red paint, and as Adam just said, you mentioned the word blue paint, it would say make blue paint a link to blue paint, because it knows that there's another page about that, because you've got blue paint as a key phrase.
Brilliant.
So it's kind of doing all of that internal linking suggestion. And if you then go a step further and buy the WooCommerce add-on, which is quite expensive, I think it's £100 and something a year, or $129 or something, on top of the 50. So you're looking at about $200 a year here for the whole set. But that will then do product level suggestion. So if you mention products in blogs or on the homepage, it will say this text should be a link to that product. It will also notice where you're using product images. So if you're using a carousel of best images, it will suggest optimizations for those. So it can get quite in depth with its suggestions. And I would say on the free one, you should only really be using the free one on let's say a sort of brochure website with maybe 15 to 20 pages. If you're going into WooCommerce, then you really do need to pay for the top level one to get the best out of it, I would say. Because again, WooCommerce doesn't do a lot of these SEO things out of the box. So in order to get the best value, I would say, like you can do all the stuff that Yoast does on its own, but it's going to cost you more than the plugin. So you may as well just get the plugin because it automates a lot of it. The other thing it does is if you delete a page, it 301 redirects it, which is a bit technical. We'll get into that in another whole other podcast. But that, all you need to know is that that's a good thing, and it saves you one click and it's done.
It saves time and it will pick up issues and errors, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that with Yoast SEO is it's a really good plugin, but you kind of have to understand what you're doing with it and make sure that you understand what it is telling you. It's not just going to do it for you. It doesn't just do SEO for you. It just enables you to very easily start investing in that kind of SEO structure or the changes you want to make, without needing to kind of get a developer to implement those things for you, which normally you would do. So, and I think just very quickly as well, just because you've got Yoast SEO installed does not mean that you are now good with SEO. It's far more kind of nuanced and complex than that. It's kind of the starting point. It's like buying a hammer to build a house. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think also the other thing is that Yoast has some other add-ons. So it has a video add-on, which is about 90% marketing and 10% actually worth it. And what that says it does is it allows Google to index your videos. Now, this is only useful if your videos are hosted on your website.
Yeah.
If you're embedding them from YouTube, Google can read them anyway. So, but it doesn't tell you that. We purchased it for a website and noticed absolutely zero traffic from this supposed video feed that it creates. It created nothing in a year, so we cancelled it. I wouldn't bother with it. It was a total waste of money. The other thing that is ultimately a pretty big waste of money is the Yoast Local add-on. Again, I think it's $50, something like this. It creates one XML file, and that XML file, you can, if you're with a 5-10 minutes and access to the server, you can make that same file. You can send the blog on how to do it to your developer, and they can make that same file. It's not difficult. However, where Yoast make the money is the upsell and the cross-sell. Yoast also, what they do is they then pester you until you pay to do their training. And their training's about $600, I think, their SEO expert training. It's probably very good, but I would say, essentially, if you whiz through your titles, try and get your pages to at least orange, and look at what it's telling you. Don't just look at the traffic light, but look at what it's saying. Obviously, use your, sense of urgency. If it's like, your website uses the passive tone is another one it does, and you're just like, do you know what? That's not make or break for me, but that might be the difference between yellow and green. And if that's all it's got left, and you don't think you're happy with the text on your page, then, as Adam said, you don't need to go for that green.
I think always just read this kind of goes beyond the Yoast thing, and it's more of a broad SEO thing, but just always read your website as if you're a customer. And if something doesn't read quite right or it reads badly, that's probably quite bad for SEO, because Google is always treating your website as a real user. So I think with those kind of those hammers such as Yoast, where it can be a little bit blunt and it can be a little bit, it just tries to hit everything and goes, these are all the errors. You need to know how to interpret that and how to kind of deal with that. So either seek SEO advice, or just kind of read it and interpret it with a kind of heavy caveat that Google isn't going to de-index your site if you get a red traffic light on your Yoast thing. It's not that severe. It's more about kind of guidance and putting you on the right path. Yeah,
and I would say whatever sector you're in, I would search the Yoast Help Centre for your sector, and they've probably got a blog on the optimum settings for it. And just keep an eye out for the really obvious things that are red, like you haven't named your image, all of these real basics that it can spot. And this is what having an SEO audit would find. But ultimately, if you go through and you've done every page, so a small brochure site, for example, 15-20 pages, that's not too much work. I'd recommend it to go through it, but if you're going to go into WooCommerce, then definitely invest in that extra add-on for WooCommerce. But also, I would definitely speak to an SEO expert because really what you need is someone who understands conversion rate optimization as well as the SEO, and that's where SEO stops. Is it can only read the words. It's not looking at layout and buying intention and calls to action and all the other stuff. But we'll loop back round and do conversion rate on a different topic. But I think my sort of final thoughts on Yoast is it's essentially, I would say it's an essential plugin if you are using WordPress. There are other ones out there that do it. I've not used them. We've always used Yoast because their support has been excellent, and they have only once released an update in about 8 years that has taken all of our websites offline.
That's pretty good.
Which for a free plugin is very good. Any of you WordPress people out there will be familiar with the immortal, oh whoops, I forgot to close that comment, and bam, like a couple of million sites offline. But Yoast they've been really good, their support's been very good. And I think it covers the areas that WordPress just doesn't even touch. And for $0, you can make that WordPress site rank a lot better than it would do without that plugin.
It'll give you a lot of guidance and a lot of tips, but just caveat it with the fact that always view it as a user. And if you're going to start anywhere, I think the main thing that I end up doing for WordPress sites is optimizing the kind of the page titles. And that normally means is not optimizing in any kind of technical sense, it's normally just saying what the page actually says. Because quite often people don't necessarily word their pages in that kind of explicit manner. So they'll have a services page which just has a list of their services and doesn't say photographer in Sussex, for example. So just little things like that make very much human sense. It's not necessarily like it's not a hack or a kind of win thing with Google. It's just making sure the page actually makes sense. So, just do that. Before I got another rant.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us for the live Bullshit Busters. We can also be found on Spotify and on iTunes and on Google Podcasts and some other good podcast outlets. Most of the other good places you can get it. So if you want to listen to us instead of watch us, then you can do that. Do find us on those channels, or give us a subscribe on this channel and you will get more from us next week. And yes, if you've got any questions, reach out to us. We will put our LinkedIn links in the description as always.
Show notes or whatever.
Yes, and the show notes. And if you've got any ideas about other topics you'd like us to cover, then do get in touch and we will debunk those myths and bust the bullshit around whatever you need some help with.
Yep, perfect.
Excellent. So until next time, see you later. Bye.